right, so I just wet a little bit of this petal. I'm just gonna try this out. I'm gonna put a little yellow here, and I'm gonna let some of it touch that wet spot I made.
Doris, what's your blue you're putting in there? Is that just
This
cobalt?
is Cobalt, and I'm kind of thinking I might drop in a little cerulean just to jazz it up a little. Just I want to keep it light. I want to make sure I don't lose my whites. I have a little cobalt blue here, so I'm adding it to the green where I want it darker. So I'm not necessarily going for the darkest dark just yet. So I started with the white flower, but I'm going right into the background as well.
Okay.
So I'm going to work in an adjacent manner, just going from one thing to whatever's next to it. So for the shadow color on the flower, I'm using cobalt blue, but I'm also using cerulean. And I like to keep a wet brush handy just to soften some hard edges, especially within the flower. So right here, the center of the flowers in shadow, I'm going to use some raw sienna. This is the most obvious negative painting around a white flower. But I love how the flower just pops. Bringing out the forms in the shadows is a more subtle kind of negative painting. Go right to my magenta and let it touch the wet leaves next to it. So there's a little, merging going on. But then while it's still wet, I went in with super strong magenta on the tip of my brush and just kept touching it right here in the middle. Rather than painting that dark on, I'm just going like that and it's spreading out. Anytime you do something that takes advantage of watercolors, special qualities, it looks very fresh. Okay, so I'm right in here. I'm going to do some negative painting to make some leaf shapes pop. Get out your pencil so you know what you're doing. There's this little edge, hard edge here, so I'm going to make that the side of a leaf. So I'm going to go into a deep green, and maybe what I'll do is have a Perylene green, which is a very dull, dark, bluish green. Creating hard edges and soft edges. So there's a soft edge, here's a hard edge. Now that might create too much contrast. I may go back later and darken those leaves, just put a glaze over the whole thing. But I wanted to show you what I'm talking about when I talk about negative painting. See that? See how these leaves are appearing? I could have a stem here. Here's another leaf. So you can get all kinds of leaf shapes and stem shapes. So it really looks like this chaotic mass of petunia. In fact, what I could do right now is with a damp brush, blur that a little. I'm going to use some of this magenta in some of the deepest, darkest shadows, and that'll help unify the color. Here again, I'm doing the magenta, starting out with it kind of dilute. I'm going to go from one flower right into the adjacent one. And then I'm going to go right into the palette. Get that strong color on the tip. And it doesn't have to look just like it does in the picture. Here I have the tip of my brush at the center of the flower, and then I can use the body of the brush, press down and get the edges. And here again, tip of the brush has very strong color. Here I'm letting the green blend with the magenta. I'm doing some positive painting of stems. I think I'll take a wet brush and just going to wet the paper out here. Maybe a little cerulean. I'm going to try to do the edges in more of a vignette fashion rather than filling up the page. It's tricky to do a vignette because you have to make sure that the edge of your image is interesting. Now doing a little positive painting around the fringes. You want to, if you're doing this kind of vignette style, you want to really be attentive to the edge that you create. So I used a little dilute cerulean here to fade out, and then I add a little with that dilute cerulean, create a little silhouette here that fades into the background. I like that.